I'll just intro Guy. So Professor Guy Claxton is one of the UK's leading education academics and is currently the Emeritus Professor of Learning Sciences at the University of Winchester. He's a leading voice in education reform and the author of over 30 books, such as the groundbreaking The Learning Power Approach, Teaching Learners to Teach Themselves, Harebrained, Tortoise Mind, and Educating Ruby, What Our Children Really Need to Learn, a book for parents on how to support their kids' learning. Tonight, he has prepared a talk especially for parents of teens about how you as a parent can raise your child to develop learning habits that will set them up for life as well as the classroom. Over to you, Guy.
Thank you very much indeed, Mariota, and hello, everybody. As Mariota said, I'm joining you from what is now darkest Sussex, and it's a pleasure to be talking to people from far and wide, not only within the UK, but people who, by virtue of their connection with MyTutor, clearly have your children's best interests at heart, as indeed do I. A lot of my professional work, my professional life, has been involved in thinking about how schools and parents can work together in order to give young people a really good flying start on life in the 21st century. It's a tricky time to be alive. There are lots of challenges, lots of stresses, lots of opportunities, lots of pressures. It's a very stressful time to be a teenager at the moment, as we know from all the surveys. And sometimes education seems to be adding yet more stress to the pile of their lives, rather than being a place where children learn how to reduce the stress on their lives, how to expand their own capacity to deal with things that are challenging and difficult. So that's my starting point, which is that schools have several functions, dual function, really. First of all, to prepare kids for exams. I'm sure part of your motivation and your concern for your children is that they get to a good university or a high quality apprenticeship, or find their way to a next phase of education that is going to skill them and prepare them for a fulfilling life. But the question is how to do that, how to think beyond, to include the exam results, which are very important to all of us, but to think beyond the exam results to how to help to tee our children up in order to be able to take advantages of all the amazing opportunities and technologies that there are around, how to help them, for example, cope with the pressures of COVID and the lockdowns that they've been through. I don't know what your experience has been like, but I know lots of parents have found it quite challenging to have their children at home, to be trying to help them in the best way they can. And some kids have come back into school from the lockdown, having enjoyed the experience, having, as it were, expanded their ability to plan and organize their learning lives for themselves, rather than being so dependent upon their teachers. And others have been a bit more adrift. Others may have come to blows with their parents about the best way to manage and organize their timetables and so on. So there are particular pressures around at the moment, which I'm very conscious of. So my talk this afternoon is going to be about how we include those exam results, but how parents and schools can work together to prepare youngsters best for the opportunities and the stresses of the lives that they're going to meet. All the surveys that I'm aware of show that when you get down to rock bottom and you ask parents what they want most for their children, you will say probably that you want them to be happy. You want them to be free of fear. You want them not to be destitute. You want them not to be in pain, not to be hungry. But above all of those very basic things, we want them to be happy, to lead a fulfilling life. The question is, what do we do? What can we offer them as a launch pad which increases the likelihood, which maximizes the likelihood that they will find their path in life, that they will find their passions, that they will find a way of earning a living which is satisfying and productive for them, how they establish good relationships, how they build successful families and successful friendships, and so on. So all of these things will be in our minds as we think about the function of education, and as we think about not only the core business of the curriculum and the school reports and the attendance and all of the paraphernalia of schooling, but how we're helping to tee our kids up for a world that is no doubt changing quite a lot. It's not the same world, certainly as when I was at school and when I was looking forward to being launched onto the world at large. Things are very different now. And universities, for example, are looking for very different things from young people and are developing different ways of thinking about how we can prepare youngsters for work. The world of work, for example, has shifted a lot. I was talking to a neighbor of mine who works for a big consulting company, and she was echoing information that you might have seen in the press recently about how quite a lot of large companies are changing their hiring policies so that they, in some cases, Google is one, Deloitte is another, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Pearson, the big publishing house, they are, in some cases, actually not allowing their job applicants to reveal what university they went to, what class of degree they got, let alone what A-levels or GCSEs they've got. Because many of these companies are now finding that the kinds of minds that they want in their organizations are not the kinds of minds that necessarily have been very good at hoovering up information at schools and learning how to be good at passing exams. I was reading an interview with a senior recruiting person at Google the other day, who said that the kinds of people they're looking for are people who have what's called in the jargon of my trade, fluid intelligence. They're able to think on their feet. They're able to be good when they're confronted with complex, unprecedented problems. And people who've been good at merely learning exams turn out not always to be, or not necessarily to be, the kinds of people that they're looking for. The world of employment is very different. Many young people now are using digital platforms to advertise their skill sets and to make contact with employers who have a job that they want done, and they want to find people who are skilled at doing those jobs. And your reputation, your online reputation, is much more important than the class of your degree or the quality of your examination results. University tutors. I was talking a little while ago to some admissions, to the people who run the counseling services at some of our most famous universities, and they're very concerned that schools have got very good at hothousing young people to get them the A-level results or the GCSE results, but they're finding that a lot of young people are arriving at university with those good qualifications, but with a decreasing amount of resilience, a lowered ability, less ability to cope with the pressures, and particularly with the independence that they now find they have when they get into university life. We know that the rise of artificial intelligence is changing the employment landscape. A recent report from a major think tank in Washington in the USA has shown with a high degree of likelihood that over the next 10 or 15 years, the rise of artificial intelligence will not be impacting so much on the traditional trades and crafts as it has been up to now. The robotic basis of production, for example. But we will now be influencing traditional middle-class professions. If you're a radiographer or an accountant, your job is going to be under threat by smart procedures that may be able to do those jobs at least as well, if not better, than flesh and blood human beings. So schools are having to think hard about what is it that prepares young people for this world of greater responsibility, of greater change, of greater challenge for youngsters. So all the schools that I know, all the schools that I work with, are searching for what some of them call results plus. The results are important, but other qualities or attributes of young people, which schools think that they are able to help children and young people develop, are emerging as more important. And that hinges on some changes in my world. I'm a cognitive scientist. My professional world has been exploring the nature of intelligence, and particularly the nature of the kind of intelligence that young people need when they're facing things that are complicated or fast changing. And our understanding of intelligence it has been shifting over the last few years. Instead of seeing intelligence as some kind of fixed, predetermined quantity that we can identify young people in terms of how bright they are and attribute their learning success to the amount of intelligence that they have and how hard they try, it's now much more common to see intelligence as being, if you like, a craft. It's being more like a collection of habits, of mental habits, mind habits, or mindsets that they've acquired growing up in their families, and also spending a huge amount of their waking hours in schools as well. And it's a craft, and some young people get better at it, and some young people don't get better at it. So a lot of my work has been around trying to identify what these mental attitudes and aptitudes are, which we are capable as parents and teachers of influencing, of helping young people to cultivate, if you like, and how we can go about best helping them, how schools and parents can join together to help their children be able to flourish as well as possible. So I want to say a little bit about what some of these mental habits are, which enable young people to be, if you like, good at dealing with complexity. A very famous psychologist has defined intelligence not as your ability to pass IQ tests any longer, but as, this is his phrase, as knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. Schools are very good at have been very good at giving young people knowledge. But the question is, how do we behave when the knowledge that we have is not sufficient to enable us to cope with novel events, with novel challenges, things that are coming our way? So what are some of these things? Well, I've already alluded to one already, which is the ability to think on your feet. Some schools are good at helping children develop that kind of flexible or fluid intelligence. Other schools not so good. Learning to think for yourselves, learning to have that kind of independent mindedness. Some of us are good at developing those in young people, others not. Curiosity, adventurousness are very important attributes. All children are born curious, but for some of them, the net effect of their education has been to diminish their curiosity. They sit in class and they've learned that their own curiosity doesn't matter too much, and they sit there waiting to be told right answers or filled up with ideas about what to think rather than learning how to think for themselves. I was in a school a little while ago in the West Country of England, where I was delighted to discover that the school motto was "Live adventurously," which I think is a good token for young people today. What about developing a skeptical mindset? the online world can be a dangerous place for young people. If I had a 12-year-old granddaughter, I would want her to have a mindset of a kind of acute skepticism about what she's hearing, what she's seeing, who she's talking to online, that she would be constantly wondering, is this knowledge good for me? Is this person who they said they are? But traditional education has not been very good sometimes at helping young people develop that kind of, not cynical, not talking about cynical, but a kind of skeptical mindset. Schools in Finland, for example, are now helping young people right from the early ages to develop a more acute ability to detect fake news or misinformation in the news or online. And that seems to me to be a very good grounding, a bit of sort of on-board safeguarding, which all our young people need to have as they're growing up. Developing their imagination. We know that imagination, like these other qualities, are like mental muscles that can be developed. Resilience is a very important one. The ability to, as I say in my work, to stay intelligently engaged with things that are more difficult or more challenging or more frustrating or more confusing than you thought they were going to be. That's a quality which we know can be strengthened and deepened, or it can be weakened by the way we interact with young people as teachers and parents. I was just reading a paper today about how creative thinking is developed by encouraging young people to develop empathy, or to develop the ability to put themselves in other people's shoes and to adopt different perspectives. Now, history, for example, will be a very good vehicle for helping young people learn to develop the capacity to think, what would it have been like to have been a historical character, to have been Elizabeth I, or a member of the Tudor court. And that will help them be able to be more imaginative, to imagine more possibilities for themselves in their own lives. Pleasure in reading, it turns out, is an important predictor of people's satisfaction with their lives, not just their ability to read, but their pleasure in reading. So are we encouraging that? Are we populating our homes with interesting subject matter, with discussions about things that they're reading, with a development of a love for fiction as well as for non-fiction kinds of reading matter, not just technical manuals. So, as I say, my work has been to try and help teachers to discover ways of organizing their classrooms which are less passive, perhaps, than some of the classrooms of the past, in which young people, instead of learning to be just more receptive and more compliant, are learning to be more adventurous, more imaginative, more creative, more critical in their thinking as they grow up. So we're learning to discover how to help young people not just develop what they know, but to become more intelligent and more astute about how they know. And of course, you know, all the parents that I know will be very interested, are very interested in things that they can do in partnership with their children's schools to develop these kinds of mindsets in their home life, as well as supporting their schools. One of the things that I don't know, some of you may have struggled with, is when children are doing their learning at home, how much do you support them? How much do you rescue them? One of the things that people have been discovering, is that it's important not to do too much for young people, not to, so to speak, help them too much with their work, because then that will only encourage them to become more dependent. It's not just about, our job is not just to support children in getting a good mark. If we, as it were, take on too much of the fashionable phrase is the cognitive load of struggling with those tasks which have been set at school, that our job is to, as it were, be the guide by the side of our children. Even though we may not know what the right answer is, we can still be very effective coaches. We can be tutors to them, to support them in their own ability to learn how to rescue themselves from difficulty. There is a source of pride that young people can acquire, which is, perhaps you may remember when your children were young, were 2 or 3 years old. I've had this conversation with a lot of parents that maybe when they were toddlers, they were trying to do something, and you went to, with the best of intentions, to try and help them do it, not to be met, not by a grateful child, but a rather grumpy child who was saying, "No, mummy, me do it." There's a pride that young children have, almost a built-in pride in their ability to rescue themselves from difficulty. And they can be quite resistant to, as it were, having that pleasure or that pride taken away from them by someone who is well-intentioned, but helping them do it too much. So our job is to be the guide by the side, to say, this is tricky. I wonder how we could go about this. What do we know? I wonder what we could explore together. I wonder what resources we might need in order to draw on, in order to be able to crack this problem. So choosing our words is important, not over rescuing, choosing our words. One of my friends who's a primary school teacher finds that using words like, "Oh, this is tricky, this is a tricky one," or "we're going to have to grapple with this one together, aren't we?" are words which can be, as it were, reassure children that if they don't immediately know how to do something, that's merely the essential nature of learning. Nobody ever did anything that was really worthwhile quickly or easily. Beethoven didn't, Mozart didn't, Lennon and McCartney didn't. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes drafts. The reality of people's learning lives, yours probably as much as mine, is that we do have to grapple, we do have to get feedback from other people, we do have to have several goes at things. Yet some people seem to have come away from school with the idea that if they can't look smart quickly, then that's a kind of personal flaw. They've let themselves down. Even, as I said, some young people going on to college or university may suffer from, you may have heard of this notion of imposter syndrome, that somehow or other there's a sort of background fear that they're not as smart as they're supposed to be, and that when they can't do something easily or quickly, or they make mistakes, or they have to have several goes at something, then they begin to feel anxious or inadequate. And that's a very unfortunate idea to give to children, that to give them the idea that if they can't do things quickly and easily, then that's somehow or other a sort of slur on their own intelligence. So we shouldn't praise kids for their ability. We shouldn't tell them how smart they are all the time, because that gives them what's known in the psychological world as a fixed mindset. It develops the idea, if they develop this idea that their intelligence is a fixed, limited capacity, then they're much more likely to feel that if they have to try, they don't like that, because it makes them feel as if they're getting to the edge. They're running out of their sort of intelligent juice, and they begin to feel sort of stupid, or, I can't do this, or this is stupid, or I'm stupid, or I don't get it. So their reaction becomes an emotional one, or something, their self-esteem is on the line, rather than feelings like, come on, I'm sure I could do this. Maybe in their out of school lives, they have a lot of determination and a lot of resilience. They might be practicing their penalty kicks or a dance move or all kinds of things with enormous resilience, but hit them with a tricky maths problem, they may go to pieces quite quickly. Well, there are things that we can do to help them build up the same resilience that they were using, you know, out as it's getting dark and a bit of a drizzle, practicing their penalty kicks. That same mental quality we can help them build up when they are coping with their maths homework or when they're coming into the classroom. Just, I think, as I say, making it clear to them that learning often is tricky and often does take time. Another thing we can do is to talk to our children, not to, as it were, pretend that, you know, we always have the answers, but to show them that adults too find things tricky, get confused, and maybe get frustrated by things, have to walk away and calm down and then come back and have another go. That this is not a reflection on your lack of intelligence, but this is something that everybody has to do. Not minding making mistakes, treating things as if they were interesting, the kind of helping us develop our mental strength, our mental stamina, rather than something to be shied away from. There's a very interesting article that I read the other day, which is called "How Not to Talk to Your Kids," which talks to, or you can find it online if you Google the title of the article, "How Not to Talk to Your Kids," which is a very good introduction to some of the research around just even the language that we use, the body language that we use, whether we start to show anxiety when we can't immediately do something very well. All of these little things can be a little bit infectious, a little bit contagious to young people. So it's important that we create an environment at home where having questions to which you don't immediately have the answers, where you're finding things that are tricky, where you're curious about things that seem complex that you can't immediately unravel, where these are just part of the normal part of family life. Making mistakes or getting a word wrong or something is just something that we all do because we're human beings, not something shameful that we need to hide behind. Asking a lot of questions, helping children develop and strengthen their curiosity, doesn't mean every time they ask a question that we have to be able to come up with the right answer. It means we say, oh, that's a really tricky thing. I haven't thought about that. Let's put that on the wonder wall. Let's stick that on a post-it on the fridge and see if we can try and figure it out. Lots of places I know have a kind of place in the kitchen. It could be on the door of the fridge or on a notice board somewhere or other stuck around in the kitchen where we have like a tangible record of the things that we're curious about, the questions that we have waiting to be answered. We shouldn't feel ashamed when we have to say, I don't know, particularly when confronted with children's homework. We should help them build up their ability to rescue themselves from being bored, for example, during the school holidays. There's very interesting research on not, as it were, acting all the time as a constant source of entertainment for children. It's a very important resource for children to learn how to rescue themselves from being bored. I don't know what to do, I'm bored, rather than just sitting watching the telly, helping to stimulate them to use their imaginations so that they will learn to come up with their own ideas, their own fantasies. In the old days, before their smartphones and before the Netflix and this wealth of digital entertainment is around, children were very often much more resourceful and much more imaginative in being able to rescue themselves. And it's precisely those qualities that, as I was saying, employers like Google or big employers in the city, all the creative industries are crying out for these days. So part of what I'm saying is a little bit of tough love, a little bit of not jumping in and rescuing, not jumping in and helping them do it so quickly, but helping them learn to inhabit with confidence a world in which things are not so easy, in which we learn to live with things being a bit tricky. It's also important, I think, not to be aware of the tendency, the all too human tendency, to try and lock kids into a particular set of expectations too quickly. They will find their way to what is going to be their passion, what is going to be their source of fulfillment in life. And as you will know, they will have discovered a whole lot of things that they're passionate about for a while as they're growing up. And our job is to, as it were, follow them and support them in these passions, even though they may seem a little bit weird. I mean, not things that are going to put them in danger, obviously, but to support them, but not to leap to conclusions about, you know, oh, she's going to be an engineer, or he's going to be a carer because he's been so kind to some other children, but to allow them to explore the full range, the full repertoire of possibilities in their lives. And certainly for us to try and contain the human tendency for us to think that we know best about what their path in life is going to be. They will find their own way. As a famous seer once said, our children are not our children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. And though they come through us, they belong not to us. Our job is to try and help them find their own path, craft their own way. And it may be very different from the employment, forms of employment, or in some cases from the values that we grew up with, that we are used to. But I think it's important for us as parents these days to try and be as expansive and as supportive as possible as young people find their way. Some people don't find their way. Parents get anxious, don't find what their path in life is going to be until maybe they're in their mid-20s or even a little bit later. But I think we have to learn to live with that, not to try and exacerbate the sense of this is problematic, or, you know, there's something wrong with you if you haven't, you know, found your university course, or if you need to change direction as you go through life. I think that's just the nature of being alive at the moment in a world that is just teeming with opportunities, with possibilities, with new ways of making a living, with new ways of being a fulfilled and responsible and loving adult. It's tricky. I mean, it's tricky, our job as parents and as educators, whether that's through being a parent or through being a teacher. It's challenging for us because there are so many risks that we're aware of, so many pitfalls that we might be aware of, but also such an amazing array of opportunities and possibilities that young people often struggle with, the mass, the weight of opportunity. No wonder their lives are stressful. The mental demands of modern life, learning what it is to be you, as we all know with our teenagers, how they are experimenting, sometimes in a way that is quite challenging for us as parents, with their personal style, with the things that they like, with their, maybe even with their gender identities or with their sexuality. I mean, these things are all challenging for us. They may challenge deeply held beliefs that we have. And yet somehow or other, we're having to flex a little bit to accommodate some of these experiments, some of this experimentation that young people are finding their way, not committing themselves to prematurely, but finding their way as they go along. So it's tricky raising children at this time in history. There are a lot of opportunities, a lot of risks, but schools are learning to work together with parents in order to build these qualities of mind, the trunk of the tree of children's personality, I think of them as, these ability to be adventurous, to be resilient, to be imaginative, to be creative, to be critical where being critical is appropriate in their lives. And the MyTutor people who I know and admire, who I've spoken to, are also very aware that tutoring is not just about helping children get the grades. It's about more than that. It's about results plus. It's about helping them to build the confidence, the capacity to face things that are initially challenging or complex with a degree of confidence and with the mental equipment to help them sort things out for themselves rather than become dependent upon us. I hope that's given you a little bit of food for thought, and I look forward to seeing what your questions are going to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Guy. That was so interesting and just so inspiring to hear such a holistic and loving approach to kids learning. We've got absolutely loads of questions through, a couple of different themes here. So quite a few around, specifically it seems around raising teenage boys a little bit more, and around the issue of how can you encourage learning without nagging, and also if a child does have these quite set habits of shame or anxiety that's then expressed through avoidance of learning, what can you do when they're already in their teens to break these habits?
Right, there was an awful lot there, Mariota. I'm not sure if
I can break it down. Sorry,
I could deal with all of them. So, and let me admit now, right from the word start, that a lot of these things are tricky for me too. That I am not a wizard, and I can't wave my magic wand and solve all the problems that you may be experiencing with your teenager at home. I wish I could, but some of these issues are thorny ones, are very tricky. So please don't be too disappointed if I can't wave my magic wand and solve all the problems. The problems with boys and girls, I mean, are different in so many different ways, and you can't just say boys do this and girls do that. The distributions of their attitudes to learning overlap enormously. Some boys and some girls are very resilient in their learning. I was reading a very interesting interview with Emma Raducanu, the young tennis star, the other day, where she was talking about how her ability to get so good and to stay calm in the midst of a difficult match was something that she's really grateful to her parents for, because they didn't, as it were, they didn't put up with any kind of emotion, you know, getting emotional or having tantrums or throwing the racket down or, you know, saying, you know, I can't do this. It's that she was trained from an early age in order to be able to be resilient in her learning. But not everybody has the temperament or is as lucky to be able to do that. Girls sometimes respond to the stresses of learning through what we call super striving. In other words, they become extremely anxious perfectionists about what they're doing. Not all, but there's a tendency for girls to go in that direction. There's a tendency for boys to rescue themselves. I mean, the fear of failure, which shouldn't be there at all, because they become allergic, they become phobic about learning, is something that we shouldn't be pressing onto children. Boys have a different way of responding to that sometimes. It's like they say, well, you know, it's stupid, or I'm not going to try, or I could if I bothered. In other words, they adopt a self-destructive way of responding to learning by not bothering to engage with learning, because if they did bother, they might be fearful that they would be revealed as not so smart. They would be revealed as stupid. So part of our work is just to try and make sure that we make, as I was saying, we make our homes places where mistakes and errors and difficulties are treated as absolutely normal. They're just completely normal. They're not things we get flustered about. They're not things that we try and cover up for ourselves. That we have an accepting, sometimes even a humorous oh, whoops, there I go again. Oh, I've always done that. Oh, I could never spell that word, whatever it might be, that we create a nurturing environment within which everybody can feel that it's worth putting in the effort. It's worth giving it your best shot because you might just get it right, rather than I'm not going to bother to try because I might fail, then I'll feel bad about myself. So even in small ways, particularly with boys, to try and help them to see what they are good at learning, where the roots of their resilience are, and then maybe help them see how they could transfer that quality, which they already have maybe on their skateboarding park or in their football training or wherever else they might find it, that they actually have that capacity, but they just, as it were, have switched it off when they go into school. So helping them transplant that resilience from one place to another is something that we can begin to do. So I think our job is to try not to increase the pressure. With the best will in the world, sometimes our anxiety on their behalf simply feeds their own anxiety. And it's that anxiety that makes them, as it were, shy away from the challenges of learning.
Yeah, so your role as a parent can really be as a really powerful coach for your child, helping with perspective of learning and the situation they're in, as well as themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, being a kind of almost like your sort of child's life coach. You're sort of, you know, sitting by the side and just helping them through the difficulties. Because if we can help them learn how to do it for themselves, then gradually their confidence begins to get stronger than their anxiety. What we call their hope of success begins to become more robust than their fear of failure. And whatever we can do to kind of stay cheerful, to find things that they are good at grappling with and to celebrate those, and then maybe to help them rehabilitate their sense of themselves as potentially powerful learners is one of the most important things that we can do.
Yeah. And on the topic of saving versus rescuing, if a child is struggling, say I was bad at maths at school, and sometimes I would just stare at an equation and no amount of trying could get me the answer. So I'm wondering, as a parent, how do you know the right moment to point them in the direction perhaps of a place where they can get help? How do you know, or when to point them in the direction of something other than just staring at the problem?
Well, I mean, that we need to be as resourceful as possible, don't we? We need to have multiple opportunities, which is maybe one of the places where the tutoring comes in, where the tutor often, I mean, I remember when I was learning to drive and going out with my dad, it was so emotionally fraught that, you know, it's like sometimes it's much better to invest in a driving instructor or someone who can help you learn to drive your own brain, not just to drive your own car. So I think there's a great place here for, you know, it could be an older sibling, an older brother and sister, it could be an uncle or an aunt, it could be a family friend. Maybe there are other people where the kind of the emotional heat is lowered, and where our children can, so to speak, it's like, you know, they've fallen off the horse a couple of times and they're a bit frightened to get back into the saddle. And the last thing they want is someone who is more sort of anxious surrounding them. So I think definitely, you know, and also there's a time to cool off. You know, it's like when you are, as you were describing, Mariota, you know, it's like you're just sitting there, you know, and you're feeling miserable, or there's like a red haze in front of you and you're not thinking intelligently anymore. Then the smart thing to do is to take a break. The smart thing to do is, you know, sort of, you know, go and, you know, have a cup of tea or a you know, a Red Bull, or, you know, watch some cartoons for a bit or something. Because, you know, when we're in that state, then the only thing that we can do that is helpful is to do the rescuing. So our job is to try and judge, when we know our child, as parents, we know our children better than anybody else. But our job is to judge when they're in a state where we can say, so come on, you can do it. I'm sure we can, we can figure this out together. Let's have another shot else. What else could we try? In other words, when they're capable of being in learning mode. And sometimes, they just need to kind of go off and cool down, or have a cuddle if they're still cuddleable in their teenage years, or whatever it may be. So it's like we keep looking for ways, like when they were babies and we were searching for ways. They couldn't tell us what was wrong, and we were searching for ways to help them when they were distressed. So as teenagers, I think, what's important, the challenge for us is to learn to be able to see maybe some of they're getting cross or acting out, and just, stay in touch with the lovely, soft, anxious, maybe, person who they are, and know when to comfort, and when to say, okay, now let's have another go at this, so not to kind of let them off the hook completely, but help them just get back to the point where they can get back in the saddle.
Yes, and of course, any great educators who they ask for help from, whether it's an older sibling or a teacher or a tutor, I mean, we all know that good educators are the ones who help teens learn for themselves rather than just saying, here's the answer, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's very understandable, that, we want the kids to do well at school. We want our children, to get good marks. But we just have to sort of, take stock and say, is helping them to do it the right thing to do? Or is it helping them get into the frame of mind where they can do it for themselves? Is that the right thing to do? And often it's the latter rather than the former.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another, we've had a couple of questions, and I'm not sure, Guy, if this is if this is within your expertise. We have had a couple of questions on helping kids with dyslexia, or different learning difficulties. I have one question here. My 15-year-old boy has high functioning autism and does not show many of the, quote, desirable qualities such as imagination, pleasure in reading, resilience, dealing with complexity, curiosity and adventure, etc. And even though I've tried very hard over the years to instill these things on them, and over the past couple of years, I have given up. Where and how could I start again when there are so many areas to address? And bearing in mind that we know you're not a wizard, but
sure. Yeah, I'm not a wizard. I'm not a wizard. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not a counselor. So I do sympathize. It must be very challenging to feel that you've come to the end of your tether, in trying to find ways to help someone who is for whatever reason, and often hard to fathom, has become very brittle in the face of challenge or uncertainty or difficulty. You don't always have to have a particular diagnosis, a sort of medical view of whether there's something that you're just stuck with. We're all on the continuum. I have learning difficulties, particularly in some areas of my life, some things that I wasn't very good at when I was young, and that I've sort of never got around to sort of facing the anxieties or the feeling that I'll never be any good at drawing, or I was hopeless at learning foreign languages, or whatever the things that were true of me when I was young. But so trying not to pass on our own, trying not, wherever we can, trying not to adopt the route of saying kind of, never mind, this is some kind of a fixed limitation that you'll never be able to work with, and try as much as possible. And I know I hear from your question how difficult and how challenging, how exasperating this can be, wherever possible, to be able to look for where is the little edge in this situation where we might be able to help our child do a little bit for themselves. I'm thinking of a special school that I was completely blown away by in London, where the staff, the attitude of the staff was always, we had many children there with profound multiple disabilities and learning needs, special educational needs of all kinds. But their incredible strength was, even in the heat of the moment, and some of their moments would get quite hot with these children, to constantly be saying, is there a moment here where I could involve the child in helping to rescue themselves from this situation? Whether it's reminding them to count to 10 or take 3 deep breaths or think of some, go to their happy place, or, you know, whatever it might be, whether we can keep that kind of edge of realistic optimism about children, if we could only find the key that we could help them unlock their capacity to be more self-sufficient, to self-regulate, to regulate their own emotions. I remember one young man, this is in a primary school somewhere in the south of England, who was very volatile in his emotions, and would often, his words were, kick off when he couldn't do something. And we worked with him, the school worked with him in terms of the ideas that I've been talking about, just giving him the idea that maybe there were mental muscles that he could strengthen, which would help him deal with challenging or frustrating circumstances. And he had some quite severe challenges. But I can remember a very moving, they took a video of some of the children in their school talking about themselves. And young Charlie was talking about how he used to kick off, but now he doesn't kick off so much because he's discovered his learning muscles. And it's just maybe finding the right language, the right metaphor, the right moment, if we're lucky, where we can help children get through the red haze of their anxiety, or even sometimes getting angry with the situation or with us. And I'm tentative about trying to offer any help here, because I completely aware of how challenging some of these situations could be. So the last thing I want to be is to try and give any facile or glib answer to these situations. That's the best I can do for the moment, I'm afraid.
It sounds as if this parent can keep trying, though.
Well, let's hope so.
Thank you for sharing that and for asking that, whoever did just then. So got a few more questions in our sort of last 3 minutes now. I'll try and ask one that sums up a couple of different issues. Let's see. Yeah, we've had quite a lot of questions on the topic of resilience. I think this became especially important during the pandemic, when kids often did just have to keep trying to learn, even though there were so many hurdles in their way, whether it was tech or not seeing an educator, or if their parent had to work from home as well. We've had this latest question from Bruno here. Since my son was little, I tried to protect him from everything, even failure, and now he's afraid of failing and thinks if he fails, he won't be loved. And it turns out that in order not to fail, he prefers not even to try. How could I work on his resilience now?
Well, it's the heart of the problem that we've been talking about, isn't it? And it's very brave and honest of you to look back and say, it sounds from your question that perhaps there are things that we could have done earlier on to help to build resilience. But my belief, and I think the research is behind me here, that it's never too late, and that there are always things that we could try to do. Particularly, I think, I'm going to repeat what I said before, I think it's an article of faith for me that all children, however resistant or vulnerable they may seem to be in some areas of their life, that we should go looking for for wherever there might be the preservation, like the area of their life where they do feel confident and competent, where they can still enjoy challenge, and try and build on that, try and build on strength and build out from strength, rather than, you know, it's just so easy to get into a vicious cycle, isn't it? The child is anxious and resistant, and we become anxious, and we misjudge maybe the moment, when to push and when to back off. So I think just trying to find that the tap route is the way I see it, like the long route that goes all the way down into the nourishing well of their resilience, whether it's whatever it might be. It's like, drawing cartoons, or playing with a cat or a dog, or whatever. If we can kind of keep trying to look for where that healthy learning, where that learning power is still alive and is still still accessible to the young person, and can celebrate that and acknowledge that as being something strong and powerful in them, even though they may not yet be ready to bring their own learning power to bear on schoolwork. Because schools can be places, it's often not our fault, schools can be places that some children find very dispiriting. It's like they spend day after day in a place where they just feel that it's not their place, or they're not good at the things that they're being required to do. I remember another professor friend of mine some time ago, in one of his books, just imagining, he was good at school, he was an egghead like me, but he was just trying to imagine what it would have been like to have been him in a school where being good at football and woodwork was the equivalent of being good at English and maths, and where, it's everything, that's something that you had to do whether you were good at it or not, and just to have had to have faced that day after day. Not all children are born to be eggheads. Not all children are destined to be scholarly. Not all children will thrive in the kind of academic atmosphere that exists in many schools. And in that case, it's part of our job as parents to help them to preserve their sense of themselves as whole and intelligent and capable human beings, despite the fact that the world of school is not working very well for them.
Great. So and I think, yes, well, Bruno's happy with that answer. And I would add to that as well that I think we've got to finish now, but Guy, your book, Educating Ruby, as well as the Learning Power Approach, if any of you would like to do some further reading and have a deeper think about what you might do differently at home with your kids, we'll send you there it is. We'll send you links to where you can buy these as well. Thank you so much everyone who has come. I really hope you've all found it really both interesting and really practically useful with some tips that you can take back into your parenting. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out the recording to everyone tomorrow morning. So if you only joined halfway, or if you want to share this with anyone, then please do. And just thank you so much, Guy, again, and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Marietta. And thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.